The most important part to any zoo is the animals in the enclosures they call home. Throughout the series, I'll be designing different enclosures for an array of animals, whilst also keeping guest interaction at the forefront of every build. Join me each week as I tackle a new enclosure and idea and try and bring it to life within Planet Zoo. Today I'm building a crocodile habitat, and this will be my first fully enclosed enclosure, and let's just say this build came with a few hiccups. My idea was simple, or so I thought. I wanted a little pond for the crocodile to swim in, a bridge over the top so guests would get the best possible view, and plenty of land for the crocodile to sunbathe, and it wasn't as straightforward as that. Before we get into the build, let's look at some of the facts, which is something I should have done before building, and land requirement is a very important one here because what I started out with just wasn't big enough. The social structure as well was perfectly fine because I knew I only wanted one crocodile to start with, just to make my life easier after this build. So I had an idea of the shape I wanted. I knew I wanted the building to be on a sort of angle to the paths, just so it was something a little bit different. And I knew where I wanted guests to enter and exit. So this sort of basic shape that I'm laying out at the moment does change, because I had to extend the enclosure because it just wasn't big enough. Including the footpath throughout the enclosure was taking up a lot of space, and as you can see the building itself was very fiddly, it wasn't quite right, so there was a lot of teething issues with that. The problems continue, and this came in the form of how to build the pond. Obviously the shaping was very off. Perhaps I shouldn't have used the square tool, perhaps I should have used a circular tool, and it doesn't like paths being in the way, so I kind of had to keep fiddling and tweaking, and it was just a bit of a mess, and then trying to level it all out, it was a bit of a disaster. Something that did work out with this build was this fencing. I used it as you walked in and out the enclosure. I didn't want to use it all the way around because it's quite tall, and I wanted guests to have the best view. Another thing that I wanted to spend a lot of the build on was the outside of this building because it's what the guests would see first. So I wanted to get the windows right, which you can see I'm placing in here, and I'm just fiddling around with the last few bits of the barrier that I put in there just to blend it in nicely. So yeah, later on in the build I do focus on the outside just to really tidy it up and welcome guests into this enclosure. In these builds I'm trying to use different roofing techniques, and obviously here I used a pitched roof just to add some height as well so I can get some plants in there, and not all of the panels ended up being like that. Some of them I ended up opening up and using as like skylights to let in some more daylight. With the crocodile in the enclosure, this is where some of my problems began. Realizing that the space I had wasn't big enough, placing items wasn't in the right place, so here came a lot of tweaking and chopping and changing things, which I won't show all on camera because it really did take a lot of time. But to summarize and give you the long story short, I did have protesters arrive, which is the first time in this zoo environment I've had that. Because they weren't happy, because the animal wasn't happy. So I was definitely frantically trying to change things and get things right so that the protesters would leave and obviously the crocodile would be happy with the space. One thing I will show, because it's quite a noticeable change, I take a dent out of the wall here, and this is where I make the extension to the enclosure. I didn't want to go too silly, but I wanted to add enough that, obviously it would make the crocodile happy. And it was quite a simple process. It just meant opening that wall there and then tweaking the enclosure to suit. And as if by magic, everything is resolved, and I'm just adding the final few tweaks to the terrain just to get it spot on. And as you can see, the crocodile is finally using the pool, which is one of the things I had an issue with. Next came adding greenery and foliage just to fill up the space. This was mainly outside the enclosure because the crocodile didn't need too much foliage inside the enclosure. This was a really fun part of the build, and a nice way to progress was the roof panellings. I was really happy with this style of roof because it really made it pop from the brickwork used on the walls. And as you can see, I'm just sort of dividing up where I want the spotlights to be in the ceiling, and here I used some glass panelling really to open up that space and really let a lot of light in. And because I liked it there, I then used it elsewhere around the edge of the enclosure. With the enclosure finally sorted, it was time to add some wall decorations. So here I am adding some panelling to the walls, which I think looks a lot like radiators, but it was a nice little touch because obviously it needs to be hot within this enclosure. So I added them on all the walls, just in different places, not really evenly spaced, just to add some colour to the wall. Sticking with the colour to the wall and obviously the environment crocodiles come from, I thought this leafy wallpaper was really nice to just have on some of the walls. With the inside sorted, it was time to move outside. As you can see there in the top left, I have just placed an archway. I knew I wanted that to be the main feature when walking into this house, and I knew I wanted some crocodile statues there. But here I am adding some decals to the wall, which is something I haven't done yet in this series. Like with a lot of my builds, and to finish it off, I decided to add some rocks and plants just to really fill in the space, as well as bring it to life. As you can see, there are lots of things lining up against the wall. I really wanted to fill in the space and make sure there was plenty to look at. And just around the corner here, I wanted to add another crocodile, just to, let people know what is here. The plan is in the future to extend the building on and build a bug house, so it won't just be the crocodiles, but that'll be for a future build. After the tedious start to this build, I'm really happy with the outcome, and the buildings turned out better than I thought it would, and I'm glad I made those changes to the build when I did, because it's made all the difference.